Of 4+ hours tonight, I can assure you. And we are on the air. All right, good evening, everybody. It is 7 o'clock on Thursday, February 17th. This is a meeting of the Lunenburg Finance Committee. I will proceed with the usual reading of the preamble. In accordance with the requirements of the open meeting law, please be advised that this meeting is being recorded and broadcast over the Lunenburg Public Access channel and on Facebook Live on the Public Access Facebook page. The following information is also provided for the public that would like to participate in the meeting remotely. To participate remotely from a computer, you can go to the what am I talking about? Zoom, the Zoom app, and use webinar ID 895-0554-6098. And you can also access that dialing toll-free 888-475-4499 and also using the webinar ID 895-0554-6098. Please note that the available Zoom option, broadcast, and recordings are for the convenience of the public. Any technical difficulties that were to occur, the meeting will continue. If you wish to continue to participate, please report to the notice, to the location on this notice. We are at Lunenburg Town Hall in the Bellotta Meeting Room. Please be aware of this and plan accordingly. This agenda lists all the topics that may be discussed at the meeting and are those reasonably anticipated by the chair. Votes may be taken as a result of these discussions. Not all items listed may in fact be discussed, and other items not listed may also be brought up for discussion to the extent permitted by the open meeting law. I've called the meeting to order, and I will note that we have 5 members present here tonight. Vice Chair Chris Menard is participating remotely. Dave Passios contacted me. He has a conflict. I believe the Parks Department is meeting remotely tonight, and he is participating in that meeting and may be joining us late. With that, would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, are there any announcements? Hearing none. Is there any public comment from the board? Seeing none, hearing none. Is there any public comment from the public? You're on a roll. Town Manager, Finance Director report.
All right. So I've reported on Tuesday night at the Select Board's meeting. Our electricity and natural gas contracts are going to expire on November 30th. So speaking with our energy broker, we'll be going out to bid, soliciting bids this spring. She thought that was the best timing instead of waiting till this summer or the fall due to the volatility in the near-term market. So our current electricity rates for town and school properties is 9.4 cents a kilowatt, and our natural gas rates for town and school properties is $5.19 per decatherm. Our electricity costs will not exceed 11.2 cents per kilowatt because we can always opt into the municipal aggregation program. So we know that, for fiscal 23 at least, it will not exceed that amount. So we expect that bids will come in around March timeframe. So we'll have an update on that time. And obviously, related to that, there's been a lot of volatility in the market. So, but we've been fortunate with our electricity rates going so far, so maybe we'll have some luck there, and we'll see how the natural gas turns out. Meadowwoods Trailer Park, I don't know if everyone's familiar with that probably Evan from being on the Board of Health, okay.
Nope.
It's a long,
Hasn't come before that
Is there a long history
there's
there?
a long, long history there. So that park was in receivership for many, many years, and they have a lot of back taxes owed on the property, and so we came to an agreement with them to take the property out of receivership and do a payment agreement. They've, I believe, found a buyer for the property, and so the payment agreement, the terms involve paying down $400,000, which we received a check for this week. So that goes against all the delinquent sewer and back taxes, and $100,000 every year thereafter until all the outstanding back taxes are paid off, and they'll keep current with their current taxes during the period too.
How delinquent is it?
Oh, it goes back.
No, I mean,
Wait.
in terms of money,
Oh,
what's the balance?
I think close to $1 million or over $1 million.
Just in back taxes?
What about sewer? Is that
That's in.
current?
No, that's lumped into that as well. So they'll be paying back on delinquent sewer as well.
And there's a new owner involved in this? That's underwriting
They've, yes, so they've, I believe, found a buyer, and that's why they were able to do this. But they changed receivership a couple of times in the past couple of years, and the current receivers have been really proactive about getting something done there. So we've been working with them. It's like, out of all the options, this was the best case scenario for this, so we're really happy. So this will go directly affect our free cash for, next year. That's certified in the fall.
So that rolls into free cash because we've already paid, we've basically absorbed that by abeyance
Right.
and whatnot. Okay.
And I sent around a townwide email that the open meeting law is extended due to the governor's act that was passed this past Saturday, so that's extended until July 15th. And town caucus is March 14th at 6:30 at the middle school, high school, and warrant articles are due by the 21st at 4 p.m.
Is that it?
That's it.
On the electric and gas rates, do you anticipate that your budget proposal that you're about to present, will it be able to absorb whatever?
That's something
Changes
I
there,
want to
right?
look at our history of usage and do a projection.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
as well as the school will need to do that as well.
Okay.
It's both town and school accounts.
Any other questions for the town manager? I guess it would, just because I'm a loudmouth about these things, I guess I should bring up the trash issue, because we are on TV and the entire town is
Eyes are on
quite
trash.
exercised about
Yes.
this, including my mother, who's probably watching.
Yeah, I did get an email from her today, which I passed directly on to E.L. Harvey
There
and
you go.
DPW.
Good.
But, so the update today, we had a meeting with E.L. Harvey today, the DPW director and I. They've had a series of perfect storm scenario. Obviously, there's a lot of industries are experiencing a labor shortage, so there's a shortage of drivers. Advertising, they've increased wages to try to address that, to attract more people. There's just not, they've had 2 people apply since December for job openings. COVID, they've had people out due to COVID. Monday, one of their drivers that is Lunenburg, he was in a serious car accident with the truck. So that truck is out of service, as well as obviously the driver's in the hospital. They had another truck that they used for Lunenburg that had to go into the shop, and due to supply shortages for parts, that there's been a delay in getting that truck back. So the person that's responsible for the municipal management part has been driving one of the trucks, which is highly unusual. So this week, today they were trying to finish Tuesday's route. What didn't get finished today for Tuesday will be collected tomorrow, so that includes Pleasant Street and West Street. So that'll be tomorrow morning, first thing, they'll hit those roads and do the rest of Wednesday. And then Thursday and Friday will be Saturday. They have 6 drivers coming out on Saturday to clean up everything. And they expect no delays next week. But we stressed that communication, this needs to be communicated to us in order for us to let everyone know where it stands. That's where we are right now.
I know we covered this in last year's discussion about DPW and trash, and just for purposes of clarity, if a resident has a question or a comment, or their house gets missed, as my house did last week, where do they go? What do they do to inquire about what's going on?
The number to contact E.L. Harvey is on the town website, and I think that was in the flyer that everyone should have received when they first transitioned. So customer service, they should contact there. If they're not getting anywhere there, contact DPW.
Okay, so DPW is the...
Yes,
is the
oversees
local
the,
agency that oversees it. Okay, okay.
we as well get those calls, obviously, but that's the primary department.
Yeah,
that they should be.
I think there is some confusion, because I think there was a period where calls were asked to not go to the DPW, but to go to the town manager, or vice versa at one point. I think there's at least some confusion there, so in any event, I thought I'd ask the question, so.
Does E.L. Harvey, do they check in at all with the DPW director to say they're here in town? Is there any kind of accountability that way?
I think they try to, as far as I know, I know the DPW director has the municipal manager's personal cell phone to contact. He did say he's usually the one to communicate where they are at the end of the day, but because he's driving truck and having to go to municipal meetings at night, he hasn't been able to keep up with that. So I believe he'll be driving again next week, but not the week after. So, but he did communicate at the end of today where he was. He didn't think he had any municipal meetings next week at night, so we should be able to get that end-of-day communication where they left off.
Okay, good. Okay, next agenda item is a discussion on the ARPA presentation from the 2-1 Select Board meeting, spending priorities, community input, and decision calendar. So we covered this a little bit during the town manager's report, I think, on the meeting that we had on the 13th of January. And we were all invited to watch, and I hope most members did take a moment to watch that select board's meeting. There was a presentation given, and forgive me, I can't remember the name of the company.
Capital Strategic Solutions.
Capital Strategic Solutions. I will remember that at some point. That gave an overview of the 4 categories of ARPA, which I hope at this point we're all reasonably aware of. They gave an explanation as to now this $10 million basically free pass that every municipality gets under the lost revenue category, which with Lunenburg being a recipient of roughly $3.5 million in ARPA funds, that basically means that all of our ARPA grant falls under that $10 million opportunity, basically to spend that money still within the parameters of we can't put it in savings accounts, and we can't use it to
For pension or.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but we do have quite a lot of breadth in terms of what we can potentially do with that money. The other part of that conversation, which I think is probably more pertinent to the Finance Committee, is the calendar by which and how we're going to go about making the decision as to where to spend that money. Now, to be clear, when I say we, I mean the town of Lunenburg. Specifically, the select board has complete discretion on this. So if the select board decides that they want to spend all $3.5 million on a park across the street, it's up to them to make that decision. But where I see it being, fairly pertinent is that we have a long list of things that we could potentially spend money on and don't have to go too far to think about what those things could potentially be. At Tuesday's select board meeting, we got an update on the project. There was actually a workshop on the project at 30 School Street. Coincidentally, the total project cost is about $3.5 million. We have Marshall Park looming. We have Vertex-related costs that we could potentially put toward this building or the Ritter building. The list is very long in terms of where this money could potentially be allocated, to also include things like one-time payments to first responders and, some of the other categories that were outlined as part of Arpa. So the consultants are going to do a community outreach program to solicit feedback from the community. My first question is, number one, how much do we really need to spend on soliciting feedback from the community when we're probably going to hear from the same people that we frequently hear from on surveys and that sort of thing? The list of potential things that we could spend money on, I think the pressing issues are pretty obvious. And then the third piece of this is the timeline, right? Like, at what point is it reasonable for the town manager and the select board to weigh in on where they're leaning? And the reason why I think this is relevant is because we're also charged with, applying some oversight and thought to a budget, which includes a capital plan, which right now is $1.7-ish million. And there's also unexpended free cash of about $1 million and another $500,000 of unappropriated funds. So when we think about this in its totality, there's literally like $6.7 million that you can start getting your head around our strategy in terms of what we're spending money on, particularly when it comes to capital, not just this year, but over the course of the next several years in special projects like 30 School Street or potentially Marshall Park and so on and so forth. So I put this on the agenda because, number one, I think that the Finance Committee needs to be continually informed and part of that conversation. But I also put it on the agenda really because I want to express just my own personal angst with this. I think that there are some long pole items that could potentially influence some short pole decisions that we need to make around capital and free cash that I feel a little bit lost. Like there are things that we don't know and decisions that can be made by the town manager and the select board that are potentially beyond the sphere of information that we would potentially like to have during the budget process. I hope I articulated that reasonably well enough. But I think that this is a very different year. The good news is it isn't a budget crunch year where we don't have enough money to do what we think we need to do with the budget. The bad news is that there's a lot of ambiguity here that I think that it may be incumbent upon us to try to reduce some of that ambiguity. So with that, Madam Town Manager, you're welcome to comment, or I would certainly welcome comments from the board as well.
So what I'm hearing is that you think the two processes should align with each other as far as the budget process and the decision on spending for ARPA funding.
I think that there should be some directional indicators that help the budget process, that help the decision-making in the budget process. In the email that I shared with you the other day, an example is the asbestos abatement at 30 School Street, right? Now, we're spending several $100,000 on asbestos abatement at 30 School Street. That number is also included, I assume, as part of the tear down for that building as part of the 30 School Street plan. Conceivably, it's the beginning of a $3.5 million spending project that we don't know how we're gonna, or, you know, the timeline or how we're gonna go about addressing that project. But we've got a big chunk of money sitting in abatement on the capital plan that, you know, conceivably could be spent on something else. It just, you know, in my mind, I'm more than happy, and in fact, I think it's great that we're proactively spending money on things that we know that we need to address. But on the other hand, it feels like there's a lot of unanswered questions around some of these projects and the strategic direction that we're moving in that, you know, I just feel like I just need more information.
I think, I mean, in regards to the 30 School Street project, having just received that cost estimate, I think that needs to be digested and needs to go into the pieces that we could pull out, maybe the town do, like the roads, if the highway department can do that to save money but not cut corners. I think that's an important piece of the discussion that they have yet to have. And so that is on the select board's agenda for the 8th and the 15th meeting, because they know they have to put together articles for annual town meeting if there's going to be a funding request associated with that. So I think once that decision is made, it will help inform whether that will be partially or whatever portion through ARPA, or is that going to be a separate funding source for that project. The Marshall Park, I don't believe those figures will be received until closer to town meeting, so that's a ways off. And if it's any indication of what we receive for cost estimates for 30 School Street, there's going to be a good price
Be a lot of
tag,
money.
yes, for that project as well. So what I foresee is us starting to, in my mind, is assembling all the known projects at this time in a spreadsheet, but also identifying whether there possibly could be funded through state or federal sources too, because I really want to maximize those funding resources. For instance, the 925 Mass Ave old gas station, we should be able to receive funding through the federal infrastructure bill for that. That's federal money. So that, if we didn't have that resource, that could have been a potential project for the ARPA funding. The Woodruff property, where the gentleman got up at town meeting to talk about the land where an old farm where they dumped materials there. We just got approval through conservation, so there's going to be costs associated with that project, but that could be a potential project through EPA as well. So I think we really got to get a handle on, especially annual town meeting articles that we need to act on in the near future, and identify all of those. Obviously, there's in the time that we have to use the ARPA funding, there's more requests than there is funding. So we're not going to have a problem using those funds. It's just identifying what are the priorities and the best funding source.
Yeah, I think that, you know, there's no shortage of variables here that we could potentially play with to include funding sources, but obviously on the lined up opportunities to, you know, the lined up projects, opportunities to spend money. I think that, you know, in my mind, one of the things that I'm very concerned about is, as we looked at the TC Passios project in the fall, we looked at the cost of that project, and we looked at the the potential cost, the escalation, certainly, but also the potential cost of replacing or renovating Turkey Hill. And by the way, that came up again last night. Was an agenda item on last night's school committee meeting. The school committee is interested in what the long-term strategy is for that building. We've got, you know, more potential costs with building a new municipal office building, rehabbing this building, rehabbing Ritter potentially, or repurposing, I guess I should say, both of these buildings. dealing with our need for municipal office space and community space, dealing with Turkey Hill, you put all that together, those projects alone probably exceed our borrowing capacity over the next 10 to 15 years. So this year, we're at 9% debt service, and over the next 2 years, that goes down to 7%. We need to be very thoughtful about borrowing, and perhaps even proactively borrowing, so that we're not wasting that capacity, but simultaneously thinking about, okay, well, what are all these other needs? 30 School Street, Marshall Park. Are we gonna use excludable debt to deal with those projects? In my mind, I'm thinking, hope not. But I think that when people who aren't looking at this every day, like the people who aren't the professional managers, people on this board, members of the school committee who are asking, okay, is this pie in the sky? Will we really be able to deal with this school in 8 or 10 years? We've got the fiscal forecast that, kind of looks at the capital plan. Admittedly, you've said there isn't money to deal with the capital items really for Turkey Hill over the course of the next 10 years. Is it feasible to be able to go and do this project at some point? Well, if it is, we need a debt forecast or a capital forecast that is as rigorous as the fiscal forecast. And I think right now, that's what we're missing. And I don't think you can solve that problem before town meeting. So don't get me wrong. But I think that directionally, if we can take things like, newly available money like Arpa, like, free cash, and think about, okay, how can this contribute to a longer term strategy that makes sense? We're not going to be able to know all of the unknowns, but, what can we start to bring in a little bit closer so that we can begin to make some of those decisions? And as we look at things like the capital plan or unexpended free cash or unallocated funds, we understand that direction, because I think that those are important variables that we need to understand when we're thinking about where we're spending money on capital this year. And I understand it's these questions may be more rhetorical than realistic, and I understand that, but right now I definitely feel like we just don't have enough directional information.
And I think, as far as the outreach, and I know they can do soup to nuts, this company. We tailor it to what we need. I think what I heard when we first received the ARPA funding is that we really should look to our community. What are your highest priorities? And I think that is what they can bring, as far as, because we don't have the manpower to do that with our staff, that they can handle that piece, but we can make it what we want. As far as debt going forward, I hope it's apparent in the way I've approached the budget and capital and putting money into reserves. That's my plan. Like special purpose stabilization, if we can pay for large trucks and big fire apparatus right out of that stabilization, we won't have to borrow for that, because that is the one thing that's holding us back with our bond rating being the highest rating, is our debt ratio. So, but you have to, these large projects, they're going to require taking on debt. So as long as we're conservative in other areas, I think that will help us, when we do need to borrow for those large projects. But having a really good handle on how much that cost is, we need to know that information as well, to where we're at with our debt capacity.
The outreach that's being done for ARPA, well, first of all, where does that money come from? Is that from your budget?
No, that would be from the ARPA funding.
So we're spending that money out of the ARPA funds? And what are the anticipated costs of that outreach?
It's hourly, so it's whatever like I said, what we tailor it to. One of the big draws of the services that they do is the reporting requirements that are going along with these federal funds. These have to be audited at the end. And there's a lot of reporting that goes into it, just like the CARES Act that Karen Brochu spent a lot of her time, which is such an added responsibility. on top of her existing responsibilities, that was a real draw to this firm and having this service available. But, so we can tailor it down to whatever we need. If they do a couple surveys and we get a little more input from just people who come to meetings, they can help us in that respect. And
When do you anticipate that scope will be figured out and we'll be moving on that?
they can, they've provided some website content that we have to put up on the website, and they have some surveys ready to go when we are, so.
Okay. Any other thoughts or questions?
Chris has his hand up.
Mr. Menard?
I like the idea that Heather was saying of getting everything on a spreadsheet of all the anticipated costs, all the anticipated revenue sources associated with it. And certainly we should not be allocating ARPA funds to something that would otherwise have another source of grant funding or something like that. So I think that that's important, always taking that big picture view of both revenue and expenses and what other sources of revenue we may be looking for. So.
Mr. Gregg?
Question, with the ARPA funds, my memory was it was 3 years? Is that, we have 3 years to spend the money or to allocate where we're going to spend it? How does that work?
They have to be committed by the end of 2024 and fully spent by the end of 2026.
Fiscal?
No, calendar.
Calendar. All right, so we have some time, a little bit of time, yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, one of the things I think we had a couple months ago about the buildings and all that, and we just don't have a good handle on what those things are. So as far as that's concerned, there might be, advantageous to us to kind of let information come in on that side so that we can make better decisions. On the other side, I agree with Chris, if we shouldn't be using the money on things we could get at other places, but it seems like we have a lot on our plate, so we have to prioritize it, but we also have to have the information so we can make we, meaning the town, make the right decisions. It's to me, it's hard to do that. And with the consultants, who I'm sure are very smart, we have to give them as much information as we can. If we just tell them these are the things and we don't tell them about these other things.
I think that's a very good point, is making sure that there's context in that communication.
Right. So they know that we have these other things coming along.
Are the surveys going to be discussed publicly before they are disseminated?
We can do however we want to approach it. Yeah. You made me think of another criteria that I think has to be a consideration in use of ARPA funding is the feasibility of getting that project done in that timeline. We can't look at a project that, we might have to go through full design, construction. If that timeline is going to exceed that, that's a real issue. We won't be able to use it. And we're all going to be competing for the same, group of design and architects and construction companies. So it's great to have this influx of money, but
Yeah, that's a very good point. When you think of big engineering projects versus small projects, it may make sense. I just picked up my Taipei and Vertex reports this afternoon. It may make more sense just to start going down that list in rapid succession, because we know that we're going to have to spend that money sooner or later as well. So I think, there's a lot to figure out. Again, directionally, I think we've got to, not that we have to stick to not that the opinions need to be decisions, but I think directionally, some of these opinions need to surface so that we can have clarity, as we're making the shorter term decisions that we have to make. And I guess that's my point. Obviously we're not.
I guess you could also think that you overthink the problem and you just say, I have however much money I have in front of me right now, as long as I can go spend that on projects that won't otherwise be eligible for reimbursement, why don't we just get going on it and, start attacking all these issues that, our capital plan list was longer than what we had funding for. So just like have at it, like go.
I think that's a fair point. Yeah.
One other question. So is the consultants, there's no requirement to have them do any kind of survey, is that right? Or
No.
Okay, so this is a choice that the board is making to solicit more input? Is that what it is?
Yes, that's a community decision. A lot of communities have approached it that way, just to get input, and especially prior to the final rule by the U.S. Treasury, when the categories were more restrictive, and we didn't have kind of like an unrestricted use of those funds.
Yeah.
So it was, more limited as far as broadband or water, sewer, infrastructure.
Okay.
I mean, I'm all for community input. I think that that's great. But I feel like, community input, like, let's go build a pollinator habitat in land that we don't own and turn it, like pie in the sky things are not necessarily feasible or probable, right? Whereas if you can say to somebody, do we fix our envelope issues with Town Hall and Ritter and Brooks House versus do we go build a park at 30 School Street versus do we reconfigure baseball fields at Marshall Park? Like, I mean, I think that those things are things that public opinion really does matter. And we want to know what people think, assuming they have the right information to go along with that, right?
Yeah.
In my mind, that would be really helpful. Somebody wanting to build an Olympic-sized swimming pool on, land that we don't own
Right.
yet, like, in my mind, that's not really helpful.
That's how the survey is
Exactly,
written.
right. Okay, anything else on this? So I'm gonna put this on the agenda probably once more during budget season toward the end, and I'm gonna continue to be a pain in the butt on this. So be prepared.
Forewarned.
Forewarned. Thank you. All right, so with no further ado, the reason why we all came here tonight, did I skip the budget presentation?
Yes, you did.
Oh, I'm done.
How did I do that?
It was a
All
very
right.
quick meeting.
Motion to adjourn.
I apologize, that was not my intent at all. I just checked off something else that I shouldn't have. So, without further ado, let's do the budget presentation.
Could you make me co-host?
I
I'll
will.
share my screen.
While I'm doing that, the way I would recommend that we go about this, I've seen what I think is this presentation. I assume it's the same deck that you presented on Tuesday. I have a number of questions and comments, but I'd ask that we, in the interest of efficiency, during the town manager's presentation, let's contain our questions to mechanical procedural questions, right? Like, not necessarily the why questions, but are we items of clarity and understanding, okay? And then if we want to get into questions about discretionary decisions around why did you do this over that, let's wait till the end on those questions, okay?
Yeah.
And then the other thing I would encourage you to think about is with respect to department level budget discretionary decisions. I think everything's on the table because this is the omnibus budget presentation, but a lot of it may be cueing the town manager to prepare the library director that this question is coming. So we might not get the answer tonight, but it's good to telegraph those questions and those concerns for the department heads when they come in starting next week. Okay?
Okay. All right, so start. So I'll start by sharing our timeline to date. The Capital Planning Committee began meeting in September 2021. They met with all the departments in November and December. And I sent the target budgets to departments in December 2021. They were due back January 12th, 2022. Capital Planning Committee finalized their prioritization projects for the fiscal 23 capital plan on January 4th. And I presented the fiscal 23 capital plan and 5-year forecast in January. And as required by town charter, I'm presenting the preliminary budget presentation tonight. It's mid-February. So goals in preparing the fiscal '23 recommendation included creating a balanced budget that funds the operating budgets using recurring revenues at the current service levels with some exceptions. The original target budget used in December and the preliminary budget both use conservative revenue projections. It meets the town's financial policies. It includes smart growth to include long-term fiscal sustainability. And certified free cash is not used on the operating budget and abides by the town's financial policies, including putting money towards capital, $1 million of free cash, $266,696 of free cash towards OPEB, which is, per our policy, 10% of the previous year's certified free cash, $100,000 of free cash deposited into the regular stabilization account per our policy, and $250,000 of free cash deposited into the special purpose stabilization account. So when we look at the target budget, on the revenue side, it included property taxes adding 2.5% to the previous year's levy, adding new growth, which the estimate at this time is $213,523, and the debt exclusion amounts. For state aid, the target budget included level funding the state aid based on the fiscal '22 state aid figures that were approved in July '21. For local receipts, it included adding $50,000 to an increase for motor vehicle excise, but level funded all the other local receipt categories. And for other available funds, the target budget did not address use of free cash. Other sources of available funds were similar to previous fiscal year sources. On the expenditure side, it level funded cherry sheet offsets, state and county charges, and choice and charter assessments using the fiscal '22 amounts. And the departments were sent target budgets that included all known contractual increases and level funded other expense categories with these exceptions. It included costs associated for half a year for a full-time patrolman and a full year for a career firefighter or paramedic. It included an additional $50,000 for payment management. It included the known principal and interest debt payments for fiscal '23. It included an 8% rate increase for health insurance for active employees and a 5% rate increase for retirees, a 5% increase for our general insurances. It level funded the police and fire injured on duty insurance, and it included a 10% increase in Worcester County retirement and a 2.5% increase for the Lunenburg Public Schools and Montauk. When we look at the difference between the preliminary budget and the target budget and the unknowns on the revenue side, the preliminary budget uses the governor's budget proposal, which is a 10% increase, or $949,734 more than the target. The new growth, it assumes that same number, $213,523, that we will continue to monitor and adjust if needed based on building permits. On the expenditure side, the cherry sheet offsets and state assessments, they also use the governor's figures. For health insurance, they assume the preliminary budget that you received included a 6% rate increase for active employees and a 5% rate increase for retirees. So that was reduced in January when Maya released their rate ranges. We just received this week the actual rate increase for active, and it was 5.56%. So not far off that number.
So will that come in an update?
Yes,
Once we
and
start
when we do,
doing
yes, the capture, the
The dashboard.
dashboard. Liability and workers' comp insurance, it assumes the 5% increase. These renewals are received late March. And as I said, police and fire, it keeps that level funded. The Montauk assessment, based on information we received with the minimum required contribution and the capital and transportation costs, includes a 21% increase. Those actual assessments are typically in the beginning of March. And this other unknowns right now are annual town meeting articles that require funding. When we look at revenues, this is a breakdown of our projected revenues. So property tax, $30,854,795. State aid, $10,390,105. Local receipts, $3,110,153. Other available funds, $3,133,885 for a total of $47,488,938. This slide is a breakdown of our revenue sources. So 65% of our revenues come from property tax, 22% from state aid, 6% from local receipts, and 7% from available funds. This slide just shows the dollar increase over the previous fiscal year for the revenue categories of property tax, state aid, local receipts, and available funds, as well as the percentage increase. So you'll notice the governor's proposal much greater than the fiscal 22 increase that we received, and our local receipts still remains conservative as in prior years, because these are elastic revenues, and available funds is similar to the previous fiscal year. So breakdown of property tax, we have our prior year base plus 2.5%. Then we add in our estimate for new growth, and we add in our debt exclusion amounts that are known at this time. So, and that number shouldn't change. Our maximum allowable levy is the $30,854,795. This slide is, I think I shared during the financial forecast. It's a history of new growth the last 5 years. And then it just shows by a 3-year average, 5-year average, and 10-year average. So right now, being around 213,000, that's below our normal average. Last year, it was 430,000 that we realized of new growth. But we'll continue to monitor that. We get those figures from the assessors based on current building permits and projects that are expected to be complete.
Do you have any idea when the permit's going to be pulled for Lunenburg Central?
It has been pulled, and I did talk to the assessors about that one because that was a prior question. So depending on their level of completion by June 30th of this year. So if they would be taxed at that level. So there might be some incremental value of new growth to that, but they wouldn't be complete until spring of 2023. So we'd receive that new growth in the following fall.
Okay, so I understand the incremental nature of what they're building and their tax based on what they do. But given the size of the project, that's not going to affect a new growth estimate in this budget?
Not the full value. Of
I
that
understand
pro-
not
yeah,
the full value,
yeah.
but there's got to be some incremental value.
There
that
should be
will-
some incremental value, yeah. And they have begun site work, and I know they're trying to, on an aggressive time frame.
Okay.
We will continue to monitor that, though. So typically in outlier years in the financial forecast, we used an estimate of 300,000 a year in new growth. For state aid, that figure from the governor was released on January 26th, and this provided an additional $898,610 in Chapter 70 funds, which is a 11.5% increase, an additional $31,380 in unrestricted general government aid, which is a 2.7% increase, and our total estimate was $10,390,105, which is around a 10% increase over the previous fiscal year. This slide is a history of state aid. So some questions that were asked at Tuesday night's meeting by Selectman Jeffries. I looked further into, he asked, and I kind of misunderstood his question that night because charter, tuition, and school choice are both on the revenue and the expense side. So we get assessed on the expense side for both. So this is on the revenue side. Our charter tuition reimbursement is showing a 336% increase. And that would be because that figure is an estimate based on the October 21 enrollment figures. So we're trending, we're receiving more funds for kids going to charter schools.
Which we then get to pay out.
Then we get to pay out. The payout is higher.
Right.
Yeah, right. On the opposite, so school choice, that as well is based on enrollment as of October 21, I believe. And it's a decrease, so we're receiving less funds for kids from receiving communities. So less kids coming to Lunenburg for school choice. And let me see if I want to cover any of the other, I think that was essentially it. I also discussed the other effects of Chapter 70 that I spoke with someone at the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. So there's not only what the delegation sent out as far as our increase in low-income families that changed this year, that also relates to the federal income poverty level. They increased that threshold from 133% of the federal income poverty level to 185%. So that would make more families eligible or in that category of low income by raising that threshold. And he also indicated that due to the pandemic, more families were able to stay on Mass Health. We're not forced off Mass Health during the pandemic. So that ties into what they calculate for low income. So they take data from Mass Health, from SNAP, from transitional assistance, foster care, that all goes into, I think it's called SIMS, to do that calculation for low income.
So on that, I think that, first of all, it's good that they're calculating based on 185 versus 133.
133.
But they're applying that to the whole state. And so when you look at the increases in Chapter 70 across the state, Lunenburg is well above average still. So at least that was my recollection when I looked at that long list of 400 and some odd towns, So there's something going on in Lunenburg even still. Like, it's not just a statistical anomaly. There is something, something has changed.
Yeah,
The question is, how do we put a finger on that, which is...
Right, and how easily available is that data?
Yeah. Yeah. But to put a finer point on it, the other question is if it's a statistical anomaly, can it go backwards? Right? So, and I understand the way Chapter 70 works, it probably won't. We'll be in that held harmless category again. But, if this is based on, school lunch surveys or that kind of thing, like, does 1 year of kids not turning in those forms or something, does that, I don't know the answers to any of those questions.
I mean, to your first point, this is our new base. So I did ask that question. So
Yeah.
that's
So
positive.
It's replicable. It's not
Yeah.
going to go away.
For Chapter 70.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the 8.7 million of Chapter 70, that becomes the new base, is that what you're saying?
Yes.
So it won't go down from there?
Right.
Okay.
Unless
they
unless
cut
there's,
Chapter 70 across the board.
unless there's, in 2008, I think was the last time this happened, there were 7 C cuts, the governor in mid-year budget cuts, which, is pretty, very unprecedented. It doesn't happen,
Okay. Okay, but in the normal course, that's the new minimum.
It
Yes.
happened in 2002 and it happened in 2008, so it can happen. Hopefully not soon. The other thing well, I'll hold that comment.
I have a quick question. Just what is smart growth and what makes it so volatile?
So smart growth is, so we're one of 2 communities in Massachusetts that receives that. So we, it's something that we can't always depend on. I think it's Lakeville is the other community. It was another L community, actually. So it's related to, like, I believe it's associated with the Tri-Town development.
Okay. Okay.
Right. So local receipts is another revenue category, and for the preliminary budget, it is increased by the 50,000 for the motor vehicle excise tax, and level funds all the other receipt categories, and then that equates to a 1.6% increase over the previous year's estimates. This slide just is also showing actual versus estimates, and I included this in the 5-year financial forecast. Any questions?
So it's not really an actual versus estimate comparison. It's a historical
Yes,
versus
sorry,
forward-looking estimate.
Yes. Right, because we're a year delayed
Right.
in our actuals.
Right. You're not showing your 2020
Yes.
estimate compared to
Yeah.
your 2020.
I did have another slide. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm quite confused that with another slide I had.
How come we don't get any excise on boats? We have boats in town.
Good question.
I think the state collects that, don't they?
Yeah,
I don't know.
that's a good question. I'll ask. It's a category, so. When we look at available funds, the preliminary budget uses $1,616,692 from certified free cash, and that's used to offset the fiscal '23 capital plan, the OPEB trust fund, the special purpose stabilization fund, and the regular stabilization account. It uses $40,049 from unexpended capital from previous fiscal years towards the fiscal '23 capital plan. It uses the MSBA reimbursement we received for an old school project of $534,501, and this will expire in fiscal '23. It includes the water and sewer betterments, so it fully funds those associated debt services for water and sewer debt, and includes funding to cover the indirect costs for sewer, public access as well. And it transfers $42,134.74 from the artificial turf revolving fund to pay for the associated debt for the artificial turf field. This slide is showing the available funds history and the preliminary budget figures. Any questions?
The unexpended articles.
Yes.
So,
So we look at all the, so a project has completed,
yeah,
a capital project from a previous fiscal year, and then if there's a surplus,
right.
those funds are available for reappropriation.
Okay,
So we
and
use those.
this year, we've taken that and basically mainlined that into the capital plan, right, as I recall?
So
There was a very similar number in the capital plan of $40,000.
that's it. That's the number that's going towards
Right.
capital.
Did we do that last year? Was that
Yes.
basically the same thing? Because I don't
Yep.
recall seeing that 111 number, but it very
Yes,
well could have
yep.
been there. Yeah, okay.
It's in the breakdown, those 3 sources
Yeah.
of tax revenue, free cash, and unexpended articles.
Okay.
The last couple years, we've included slides on different grants, earmarks, or other federal and state funding that's outside of the appropriation that different departments receive. For instance, so looking at fiscal year '22, this year the police have applied for a Department of Justice bulletproof vest grant that they're waiting on approval of. The fire department has applied for a variety of grants that they've received. The DPW, we just applied for the small bridge program for the Flat Hill Road culvert, and that grant is up to $500,000, so that would cover supplement the already appropriated funds we have for that project. The library receives state aid, which is on the cherry sheet as an offset, and as well as the Friends of the Library donates funds, and they receive gift funds and their revolving fund. The Senior Center has received some different grants, as well as they receive gift funds and donations as well. In the town manager's office, we receive the recycling dividends grant every year, and we've every year apply for risk management, and a newer grant is a wellness grant. The school, they have a variety of both the federal funds, Sr2 and Sr-3 funds, and COVID-related funds, state and federal grants. And state and federal funding that the town has received, we talked about earlier, is Arpa funding of $3.5 million. And we received state Arpa funding of $50,000 towards the hazardous materials abatement for 30 School Street, and an earmark for the library for $40,000 for their LED lighting.
So as I look down this list, I don't think that anything here is captured in the omnibus, right? So this is all offline money.
Yes,
right?
yep.
And
Grants
so the
are,
federal grants, like Title I, for example,
that would, yeah, that's not in here.
that's not here.
Mhm.
Okay, because that
No.
is captured.
Yes.
Right, okay.
Not in the line item appropriation.
It isn't,
No,
okay.
no. That's strictly our local appropriation, that number voted at town meeting. So anything in excess of that, any grants they receive through,
Okay, so that's calculated into their per pupil spending, but it's not part of the omnibus budget.
right, the town takes tax revenues,
Right.
Whatever the number is, and then the grant funding's in above that.
Yep, okay.
I wonder if it might be advantageous at town meeting to have that number kind of posted separately, or at least as a side by, just to say, hey, look, yes, we're paying all this money in taxes and it's going to all these funds, but oh, look,
We
you
get
know,
out.
your government is actually still going for grants and funding outside of that to cover other expenses. It's just, I don't know. The optics might look
Good,
nice.
at least as a handout.
Right.
I think it's very relevant information.
It is.
I mean, the other thing that, and it's a little bit off topic, but, you've got all of these funding sources that are completely not captured in the budget. They're outside of that $47 million, or whatever it is that we're spending. Yet we do capture state aid cherry sheet money. That's all part of the budget. Yet we don't capture Chapter 90, which is reimbursement, right? So it's very odd what is not included in that budget, that omnibus budget.
Yeah, on that point, actually, one question. So, obviously the school grants here are very large compared to many of the others. And so are these typically repetitive, like they're, I'm just trying to understand if they go away, could they go away? Does that come on budget then? Like, what's the exposure there?
These
And maybe
one-
that's a question for the school
Yeah.
presentation.
Yeah, definitely, they can answer it more thoroughly than I can, but like the Sr2 and 3, those are related to COVID and other COVID grants, so those have a sunset on them as well. So the Sr2 has to be expended by September 24, and the Sr3 is June of 25.
Okay.
So this is going to be a topic with the school department, because there's a lot of one-time money here, and a lot of where that money is being spent right now is pretty critical. So, for example, at last night's school committee meeting, there was a emotional and behavioral health presentation that was given. And I don't know the exact number, but I want to say that there's basically been a fourfold increase in that staff since COVID. But only one of those positions is funded out of the local budget, the rest are ESSER. I may be off by a position or two, but the net is that we're gonna run into a problem here in a couple of years where we're either gonna have to figure out how to fund those positions, or they're gonna have to go away. And, you know, every time the superintendent has come here, I've more or less, you know, asked that question and re-raised it over and over again, because these are tough decisions that are looming.
Yeah.
And there are other grants that aren't identified here in the school that they receive, that they do receive on a recurring basis, like Title I.
Okay. Yeah, but I think the point that Peter was saying is exactly my point, is be helpful to understand all that.
Okay, on to the expenditures. When we talk about expenditures, we talk that they're a reflection of the cost of providing a level of services to residents of all ages in our community, to visitors traveling or doing business in Lunenburg, and maintaining or improving our assets. As a town, we provide services to students, we provide health and human services to seniors and veterans, recreational services, and public safety to all. And the balance is to provide the best services possible given the available resources, maintain our assets, and plan for the future by putting away funding into reserves. Expenditures are divided into the following categories. It includes departments, expenditures, non-appropriated costs such as cherry sheet offset charges, allowance for abatements, tax title, retirement assessment, includes the sewer enterprise fund, water enterprise fund, solid waste disposal enterprise fund, and cable access enterprise fund, and all other warrant articles with a financial impact, such as stabilization, OPEB, and capital plan. So to highlight some of the things that, dollar figures that were included in the target budget for the police department, that half a year patrol officer was additional $30,000. For the fire department, additional career firefighter was $70,000. For the additional $50,000 for the DPW for pavement management. The Lunenburg Public Schools, a 2.5% increase equated to additional $541,000. And for Monty Tech, a 2.5% increase equated to $22,000 more than the previous fiscal year. Worcester County Retirement, a 10% increase was $153,000 more. And for health insurance, the 8% rate increase for active and 5% for retirees was $140,000 more.
How much is in the appropriated stabilization health insurance account?
$369,334.
Okay, so this will be covered, is the intention to cover that?
No, so the budget does not include using those funds.
Okay. Okay.
What fund were you asking?
The health
The health
insurance
insurance
stabilization.
stabilization.
Oh, okay.
What's the intention for those funds then?
I think the intention at this point is to keep them in that account. And it could be possible at future years to transfer them out of that account or into stabilization.
Okay. Was your concern? Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and I've discussed that in my narrative. We've been fortunate with, really good years of rate increases and actual decreases. This year, 5.56% is the largest increase that we've seen over, the last 4 years. So, hoping we, maintain a lower percent increase, but it would be good to have something to fall back on as well.
Okay, if I remember correctly, it was, I think your reasoning was because we had a negative increase or a decrease for 22, it was to get ready for.
Yes, we thought
20% increase.
Yeah.
On 23, okay.
We had the full month holiday premium
Right.
from Maya last year, so there was 1 month we didn't have to pay any insurance for active insurance. So we thought, that's $330,000 is a lot to come up with in a fiscal year. So
I think it's prudent to just hold that money.
Of
and
course,
wait for
yeah.
a spike, you know?
Who knows what,
And if it never comes, well, maybe we roll the decision we need to make this year.
Okay.
So looking at the preliminary budget, the general government funds the target and above target requests for a part-time technical support position for IT, a part-time clerical position for conservation. It addresses wages for the registration workers, additional hours for the assistant tax collector, and increases for software, hardware, website, and internet costs. For the police department, it funds the additional full-time officer for half a year, an above-target request for a part-time clerical position, leasing a motorcycle, funds for the retirement of an officer, and addresses the animal control officer wages. For the fire department, it funds the target budget and 10,000 of above-target requests. For facilities, it funds the target and 85,000 of above-target requests for a facilities director position. For the DPW, it includes the additional 50,000 for pavement management. For the Council on Aging, it includes restructuring the meal site manager programming by adding a new position that is part-time. For the Veterans Department, it addresses the wages of the Veteran Service Officer. For the library, it includes adding 2 part-time library positions, so they would be able to open on Fridays. Those related heating costs due to opening on Fridays, an increase in programming funds. There was a cost increase for CW Mars due to our population, and it right now exceeds the minimum 16% towards library materials. For Worcester County Retirement, our actual assessment came in at 10.32%, which is $158,000 more than the previous fiscal year. For health insurance, I'll adjust this, but right now it includes a 6% rate increase and 5% rate increase for retirees. Overall increase of $124,141. And for the Lunenburg Public Schools, the recommendation fully funds the superintendent's proposed budget of 3.11%, which is an additional $673,617. For Monty Tech, the recommendation includes funding at the 21%, or $180,701. And the solid waste program, it reduces this account by $42,000 based on this year's historical expenses for recycling.
We're spending less on recycling.
So what we budgeted for fiscal '22, we based on, because it was a new contract, and the new contract, the rate for recycling was around $100 a ton. And so we budgeted that full amount, but there's a cost sharing model. So if the recycling market changes, we cost share in that calculation. So we've seen a savings there than the full budget, so.
Is that something where, were it to spike again, we should be thinking about taking some of that money and setting it aside, or?
So.
Because it's so volatile? It's like health. It's like health insurance. right?
Yes, yeah. So I was conservative on my reduction. I left some wiggle room for us just in case in that event. I didn't go to the full amount because we're only about half of a year into the new contract. So I thought 42,000 was a conservative enough amount to reduce it by.
Hey, it's good news.
Yes.
With respect to the general government and the part-time tech support, are we going to go back to having a IT director, or is that going to be?
No, we're continuing to use the services of an outside consultant as our IT director.
Okay, and do you see that just continuing on as?
At this, definitely for next year, and at this point in time, it seems to be a good model for us right now.
Okay.
So when we have, and I know I'm doing exactly what I said not to do. When we have the IT presentation on March 17th, are we going to have the consultants in to tell us
Yes.
what's going on? Okay, good.
Heather's going to do it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, I can't talk IT. Getting more versed in it, but. This slide shows all the different expenditure categories, the dollar increase amount over the previous fiscal year, and what percent of that total dollar increase each category is at. This slide is showing our debt, which is a non-discretionary expense. And for fiscal '23, our debt service is $4,497,723.
This doesn't break out excludable and non-excludable?
It will.
Okay,
Here you go.
all right. Oh, this one, yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
The one, this is well-known.
all right. So, one question that the MSBA reimbursement money,
Yes, that drops off.
is that captured in this spreadsheet? Or is that,
Yeah, so rate premiums,
Yeah.
MSBA, so the main, so I think there's a smaller, like a 59,000
Yeah.
in fiscal '24, but the main 474,000 is the larger.
okay, the purpose of what I'm getting to here, and it's a question that always comes up every year, and I know you give me the answer and I don't remember it. When we talk about the debt service as a percentage of the omnibus budget, right, so that 11% cap, is that $534,000 that is actual debt, are we including that in debt service, or is that subtracted because the money's not actually coming from us?
I believe that's calculated into the excludable debt amount.
So it is part of that 9.18%?
Yeah, oops, sorry. I'll make sure, because I'll have to
I could go into the
in-
spreadsheets
yeah,
and,
yeah.
but I think it's,
I don't think you have asked me that question.
okay, maybe not.
That I recall.
The reason why it's relevant is because it's taxpayer-supported money versus not taxpayer, well, it's all taxpayer-supported. Locally supported tax revenue versus not locally supported tax revenue. So if we were to say to the town, look, we're just refilling debt capacity, right? But it's coming out of your tax bill versus from the state, that's it's a relevant difference, right?
Right,
And when we go forward, let's say we were to do a tear down and rebuild of TC Passios, that whole formula has changed, right? So they basically pay the money up front, and once the bonding is finalized, it is what it is, we pay that money.
right, there's a reconciliation at the end, which may change your reimbursement amount at
Right.
the end of the project.
But they just pay it,
Right,
right,
yep, and then we go to bond for the rest.
for whatever's left, right. But theoretically, our debt, our actual debt is reduced by doing it that way versus carrying debt that just gets reimbursed by
Right.
somebody else. Okay.
So looking at non-discretionary general government unclassified expenses, our insurance estimates, which I went through all these in previous slides, but something to just point out, the health insurance budget, 34% of the health insurance budget is for active town employees, 17% for retiree health insurance for town employees, and 49% for retiree for health insurance for school employees. The active portion is 828,000 out of the 2.45 million. School retirees account for the 1.2 million, and town retirees 414,000.
Just a comment here, just for everybody to kind of double check on this one. When we had that conversation about that big number that we spend in schools that, seems to far exceed our school department budget number, that's a huge number. That $1.2 million, that's basically debt on services rendered, if, in actuality. I mean, I understand that these are human beings that we're talking about and we're paying for their health insurance, but it's really debt on services rendered that that's a lot of money.
And these are, so above the local appropriation amount, there's a number of other town that expenditure, so that gets reported to DESI on the total amount spent on schools. So that includes workers' comp and general liability, property insurance. It includes administrative costs on the town side. It includes, I think, roads, those types of costs. So there's a lot of data on DESI if you ever have time that you want to go through. They track a lot of data.
Do we do any sort of a retirement account matching for any of the employees of the town, be it the school or in general? I've never seen it on the budget. Okay.
No.
Nothing like that. There's nothing like that at all for the.
No, but
Okay.
they pay into in addition to being.
Massachusetts one.
Right, yeah, they pay into the Mass State Teachers Retirement Fund.
Right.
Which our state taxes do pay into that
Okay,
as
but
well.
we don't have to kick into it at the local level.
It's done at the state level.
Okay.
Yeah. And obviously they're available. They can do, it's not a 401K, it's a 40C3
Something,
something.
403B or something.
Yes, that's it.
Okay.
But we don't reimburse for that.
Okay.
Next couple of slides are related to Worcester County retirement or assessment. So all these figures are based on 2020, January 1st, 2020. And this is just a breakdown of the assessment. We get an early payment discount, so we always do that. Good chunk of change. This is just a breakdown of by department, town, sewer, school, and then employees that are both town and school related. So what that breakdown is per type of employee. On the non-appropriated expenditure side, this is when I talked about earlier for cherry sheet charges and cherry sheet offsets. So charter and school choice are included in that. That's on the expenditure side. And we also, that includes the overlay and tax title. So the tax title, we're including an additional $5,000 in that account. That's so the tax collector can foreclose on properties and move the tax title process along for properties. So there is definitely a return on investment for that investment of the tax title cost. This reflects that the cherry sheet offsets have decreased from the previous fiscal year, and the cherry sheet charges have increased. And it keeps the overlay account funded at the $120,000.
How has that typically been expended, overlay?
The overlay is so when the assessors receive abatements.
I understand, but is that, do we typically hit that 120, or is it?
So the law change that we can, used to be by fiscal year, that whatever funds you put in the overlay could only apply to abatements from that year. The law change where you can pool all the years together. Yeah, roll it into one lump sum. I will get an update from the assessors where we are this year in because they, the deadline for abatements was February 1st.
But is that overlay number a recommendation of
Yes.
the Board of Assessors?
Yes, well, historically, we've done a review of historical abatements.
Okay.
This slide just breaks down other warrant articles that include capital articles, our prior year expenses, putting funds into the OPEB trust fund, stabilization fund, special purpose stabilization fund. Last year, we created the health insurance stabilization fund. This slide is, you heard the capital plan presentation. Right now, this is the plan being recommended that in my narrative, I said that would likely be readdressed to due to other funding sources. To recap the preliminary budget, so the budget reflects increasing staffing levels for certain departments, including the police department, the fire department, adding a new full-time facilities director position, adding clerical support for the police department and conservation, restructuring the Council on Aging meal site program by adding a part-time position, creating a part-time technical support position for IT, creating 2 part-time library positions so they can open on Fridays, adds 4 hours for the assistant town tax collector, addresses wages for various staff because those wages were below the state minimum wage, includes the Lunenburg Public Schools priority needs that were identified in the superintendent's 3.11% budget, and includes the 21% increase for Montauk. Just looking at education a little further, any further reductions in the active health insurance costs, I think the school was going to readdress those in their budget. And the budget that was presented by the superintendent in January included 5 new positions through local appropriation and 3 new positions through grant funds that were identified. They will seek additional grant funding as it becomes available. Mr. Jeffries had asked on Tuesday night as well what funding they're using from Sr2 and Sr-3 funding. So I did get a breakdown of that from the business manager. And for Sr2 funding, right now they're using $331,496,000 of Sr2 funding and $395,314 of Sr3 funding for fiscal '23. So that's a total of $726,810. So that's in addition to the local funding. And it's likely that the amount available for Sr2 will increase because whatever they close out at the end of fiscal '22, they'd use that as well.
A lot of money. I mean, I'm glad we're spending it. I'm just
We'll have questions for Dr. Burnham.
scary to think about when we stop spending it.
Yep.
And I said earlier, Montauk, I received that information. Obviously, the DESI required minimum local contribution is on their website, so you can see exactly what that amount is. But in addition to that, the 21% includes capital and transportation costs. And speaking with the business manager there, she said they're still looking at if there's other possible revenue sources that they could offset assessments. But there was an increase of 11 students.
So last year, they spent ESSER money to
Yeah.
basically reduce our assessment.
Yes. Yeah.
Is that something that is within their capacity again this year, or?
I think that they were going to look at that,
Okay.
what's available.
This will come up in the presentation that we get from Montauk, but that number also includes school choice in it as well, right? So the weird thing here is if a kid from Lunenburg decides to go to Neshoba Tech through school choice, we don't pay Neshoba Tech. Well, it all goes through the state, but basically that money gets funneled through a Montauk assessment because we're in the Montauk district.
Yeah, and
right?
we have
It's-
4 students that are in that 11 students that are school choice.
Right. So it's, if a kid were to go to Fitchburg High, that number is capped at like $5,000. But because he or she is going to a tech school, it's tech money, which is substantially more, so.
I included a couple slides from DESI in the presentation. This one shows a required local contribution and showing the foundation budget for both Lunenburg and Montauk at the $21,847,900. And so you can see that's below, obviously, what we expect on education.
Can you
So it's that
orient us here again?
right there. Can you see my point? No.
So the foundation, the combined foundation budget
Yes, for both Lunenburg Public Schools and Montauk.
is 21,800.
847, 900. So the required contribution subtracts out state aid, Chapter
Right.
70 state aid.
Right. And how does that relate to our actual budget?
Well, if you were to add in that, I'd have to reassemble all the other added expenses that are outside the local line item appropriation.
Okay.
Such as-
So foundation does not it could include other monies that sit outside of local appropriations.
That's telling Lunenburg, you have to spend this amount on education. So we spend well above
Okay, that's what
that
I'm getting
number.
to.
Yep.
What is the delta?
Right.
Okay.
And this is just showing the minimum contribution for Monty Tech, the highlighted line. So showing that we increased by 11 students. Last year was 871, 685. This year, the minimum contribution is the 1,012,282. And like I said, that doesn't include capital and transportation. So to conclude, the budget includes the governor's budget proposal for state aid, but these figures are likely to change because it still has to go through the legislative process with the House and Senate versions of the budget and then fully adopted at conference committee. It fully funds all our contractual obligations and increased costs for non-personnel related expenditures. It's balanced based on the use of reoccurring revenues for operating costs. It does not draw on stabilization or free cash for operating expenses. It maintains our existing staff, but adds 3 full-time employees and 6 part-time town employees. It includes the preliminary budget that the superintendent proposed. And it leaves an unappropriated balance of $514,000 that can backfill any unknown increases or increased funding for capital and any funding needed for annual town meeting articles. And it leaves a balance of $1.05 million of free cash that can be used for warrant articles, increased funding for capital plan, or the snow and ice deficit if we don't have enough funds to transfer within the existing budget and or deposit into stabilization. And we always recommend leaving a portion of free cash to fall to next year. That will help fund next year's capital. So when we look ahead, this slide is our projected debt capacity. This is a slide that I also included in the financial forecast, just showing our levy limits, and our max available regular debt, excludable debt, and aggregate. So that's probably a larger discussion than tonight.
Yeah, but one we need to have soon.
This slide just shows the tax rate impact. It's using the fiscal '23 preliminary budget proposal. And looking forward, departments will start presenting next week, every Thursday into March. And then the Finance Committee will hold their public hearing March, I think it's 24th, I believe.
Yeah.
And we'll get the House Ways and Means budget the end of April, the Senate budget the end of May. Town meeting is May 7th. And the state budget is finalized typically in July. And this is a meeting schedule. I don't know why that's kind of warped, but we'll put this on the website as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Questions? I have a few. And some of I expect most of these won't get answered tonight, but let's just kind of get them on the table. Are we going to add $50,000 to pavement management forever?
Till it reaches $1 million.
Okay.
That's, has been the unwritten policy that we've been following for years.
And how far are we from that $1 million?
We are at 500,000 this year.
Okay.
We skipped a year with
And are we-
COVID.
Yeah. Are we expending that money fully every year?
Yes.
Just by observation, our roads are in really good condition for the most part. There are some side streets that still need to get hit, which I discussed with Mr. Oliver, and I guess I'll have to discuss with whoever's next. But I feel as if we've kind of swarmed that issue, and, maybe it's time to at least have a discussion about, is this enough for now? Do we need to continue at that rate annually? I don't know the answer to that question, other than I think it's worth asking ourselves, because we're not in the position today that we were in 5 or 6 years ago when our roads were horrible. Like, we're in a lot better condition now, and maybe we just need to think about that.
I think a piece of that, that answer is, in my discussions with the DPW director, have been to do another pavement management analysis.
Yeah, I think
Take
that's-
the condition assessment, so we keep up with our roads going forward, so we don't fall back in that same
Yep.
position.
No, I think that's warranted and a very good idea, and it would make for, and I'm not saying we should even, I think we should direct that $50,000 this year, but I feel as if, once again, we don't really have the information that we based that decision upon 5 or 6 years ago is now no longer valid. And so we need to be able to reassess based on what we have today. And my unexpert assessment is the roads are pretty good, so.
The roads are good for now, though, but there's been a lot of discussion about water running, or all of that, and just,
Great point, and I think we need
It's only gonna
to
make the
come
roads
back on
worse.
that. So I'm glad you brought that up, which is
Drainage.
stormwater.
drainage, yeah.
Stormwater.
So thank you for bringing that up, Evan. Well, let's just jump right to that. So a couple of weeks ago, you had the Stormwater Task Force in, and they talked about it. It was if you guys haven't seen the presentation, go back and watch the meeting from, I think it was the 6th of February. Really enlightening in terms of what's going on from a stormwater perspective. It seems like there's a lot of looming costs there. The state does have a mechanism to create a revenue source for stormwater, I believe, with impervious service taxes or that
We
sort
don't
of
call it a
thing.
tax.
Fee, whatever.
Yes.
Is that something that
It's essentially creating an enterprise.
An
a
enterprise,
Stormwater
yeah.
enterprise.
but regardless, there are going to be some pretty substantial costs relating to that in the coming years. Is that something that we should start planning for and having some pointed finance committee discussions around, because we haven't substantially increased our services for stormwater, like we have pavement, for example.
Yeah, well, if you look maybe back 5 years.
That was a $100,000 increase or something
Yeah.
along those lines.
And we've kind of stuck around that threshold. And that strictly kind of addresses compliance.
Right.
Like all the reporting requirements that we have to do. It does include like inspections, field inspections, and that kind of data that we have to track. But that's mostly consulting services that are required under MS4. With the Stormwater Task Committee, I believe the avenue they're gonna do exploratory work, outreach, and really more dive into creating an enterprise. And the outreach is gonna be the most important part. So as far as cost, I think there's a lot of data that we don't track because it's just part of daily operations, like, the cost of employees going out to clean a catch basin, we don't track
They do it
that.
every day. It's just what
Right,
they
it's
do.
just part of normal operations. Or road projects to itemize every little thing that's specific to drainage for a large road project. That's not something we track typically
So
either.
I think that, I'm not sure how germane this is to when Rob comes in and talks with us, but I do think that at some point, perhaps after budget season, we need to probably put a meeting on this topic and maybe bring in Mr. Rabbit and the Stormwater Task Force and.
The
you know,
consultant
because we
would
can
be
ha- we can
good to
probably
kind of
help
have
to-
in. He's, a wealth of
Yeah,
knowledge.
and we can probably help to do that outreach and get the conversation going more in a financial capacity, because the finances are a big part of this. If we start going out and buying specialized equipment to deal with some of these drainage systems that are going in these new developments, Mr. Oliver told me, like, these are multi-million-dollar pieces of equipment that we could be on the hook for, or having to pay for, services from companies that invest in highly specialized equipment. It can get really expensive.
The
Well,
back
the
truck,
town
I think.
should just not accept it from the developer.
Yeah, well, we're past that point, unfortunately.
No, past that. So, going forward,
Yeah,
it should just
yeah, I agree.
put one in, let it be part of the development.
In the police department, I'm sure we're gonna have a conversation about the merits of renting a motorcycle, leasing a motorcycle. With respect to the officer, the half-year officer. If we hire an officer for a half year, that's a full-time officer the next year. So, can you help me understand why we're doing that versus
It's,
budgeting for a full year?
They've found that in the timing for the academy, that really we're only need a half year's cost for
Okay.
a full-time officer. By the time someone can get enrolled in the academy and graduate.
Okay. But there's some, but that becomes a full-time expense in the year out, right? So at some point, we're saving 6 months of salary in this hiring plan. because
Right, so this
we've
is just
staggered it.
reflecting actual costs.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's still built into their staffing plan, their 10-year staffing plan,
Yes.
though.
Yeah,
It's just
yeah,
they're-
right. It's just we're
they're
kind of
cutting out half
staggered
of it.
half a year of this, basically, because we're not.
That's how they're intending to do it, because from, I believe, from moving forward, just because they're not able to hire someone on July 1.
Right, but let's say next year we bring somebody on full-time, they're done the academy, and they come on board on January 1st of next year, right? And we pay their 6 months. Well, next year, we're paying that full-time salary plus another 6 months for the next guy that comes, right? So, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, I'm just saying we need to think about this in terms of that half year still becomes a full-time salary in the out year.
Right, but it's already built into their staffing program, their staffing plan anyways.
Sure
They're
it is.
planning to
Oh,
add
yeah,
that
yeah, yeah, it's in the
FTE
staffing plan, there's no doubt about it. It's additional expense for us. It's money.
That was a question I had. I noticed the police and the fire department did a 5 and 10-year plan back in 2018. Is that being reviewed on an annual basis to make sure that it still makes sense and it's not too conservative or too?
No, they update that every year when we
Good.
go through the budget process.
And you get to ask them about it on March 3rd if you want.
Oh, I know, well, that's my
We're at
plan, just to
we're
ask.
at that point with the fire department.
This will
right?
be the last year, the 5th year for fire.
Yeah.
23 will.
So we've got a new dog in the capital plan.
Yeah.
It includes the cost of the dog, but there's also cost of training associated with that dog. Plus, we're sending an officer to train with that dog for a 6-month period. Does the police budget absorb that?
Yes. Yeah.
Because that's a
So
guy that's
whatever-
not patrolling during that time, right?
Right. The budget reflects, yeah.
Okay.
cost.
Okay. The facilities director position. So when I look at new positions, like there's part-time positions, there's full-time positions, that's one that strikes me as not only is it the salary of that position, but you've got this designated as a department head. So is there office space? Is there a vehicle? What are the additional carrying costs associated with this new department?
So office space, there's one office space right now available at the Ritter. It's not being occupied. There's space at the TCP that could be utilized.
Okay.
So
Are we-
vehicle, no, there's not an additional vehicle in the capital plan. The cemetery truck was the last one that was gonna get passed down, so that would have to be, yeah, discussed. But it's not necessarily, they're not gonna be part of DPW, so they're not gonna be plowing roads, so it doesn't require that they have a town vehicle.
Okay. Is there going to be is the discussion on this position and the role of the facilities director, is this a fait accompli in terms of the nature of that role and the responsibilities associated with that? And what I'm getting to here is, I recognize the need for the job, right? Like, there's clearly a need for somebody to add some rationale to how we maintain our buildings and to stay on top of it and plan and
Long-term
budget
planning.
and keep up with contractors and all that stuff. Like, I totally get that. But when I think of the bigger issues in town, such as, you know, I don't know that the school department, I think the school department they have a facilities director, but when it comes to how we balance our spending needs when it comes to capital, I'm not sure that we're on an equal footing. And I'm not sure that, for example, you know, when we go and buy a mower, well, if we had one facilities team, do we need redundant equipment or those kinds of things? You know, are we so big that there wouldn't be efficiencies in consolidating facilities management? And I feel like if we're gonna go through the effort of creating a new position, it's a good inflection point to say, are we organizing this the right way? And I don't know that discussion has been had publicly.
It's been touched on publicly. That question has come up of whether a combined position with the school is feasible, and I've had that conversation with the superintendent. So we have discussed it, you know, a number of times. At this point in time, I think, I don't think it's practical to do a combined position. The schools just the schools alone is a job for one person.
Oh, I don't doubt the manpower issue.
Yes.
It's more of an efficiency issue. It's, you know, I don't think it's a headcount issue. I
Yeah.
think it's an operational efficiency issue.
Efficiency issue, if you're talking about like having a similar outlook and plan for facilities, town-wide, town and school, I think that collaboration can happen between two department heads, a school facilities and a town facilities person. I don't think it needs to be a combined singular person in order for that to happen. And I feel like priorities may get gray with one combined person. Like, there's obviously going to be high priorities at the town and high priorities at the school side, and how those are filtered might be hard for one person to accommodate both.
Okay.
It's definitely worth discussing.
I think it's worth a discussion, and I mean, the finance committee's role is, you know, are we spending right or not? And I don't think that there's enough fodder to say that we shouldn't do this or that we're doing it wrong. I'm just not necessarily comfortable at this point. Like, this is another department head, right? I mean, it might not be the biggest department in town. It's probably going to be one of the smallest.
Important, though.
But very important, exactly. And so how we go about doing this, I think, you know, really needs to be, particularly given the issues that have come up, you know, that I've raised over the course of the last several weeks, right? Like, you know, are we truly balancing our capital needs and priorities, you know, equitably? And I'm not convinced we are still. And I wonder if, you know, bringing some of that judgment and responsibility to a single person rather than having all of these needs completely bifurcated and under the auspices of two different executives in town, I wonder if there might be some value in sharing some of this responsibility across the two functions. And you know, it's probably a circular argument that never gets resolved, but I feel as if that conversation at least deserves to be had.
Does facilities include fields in parks?
Parks would still fall under DPW.
Would, and the maintenance of the fields, the upkeep of the fields would still be under DPW?
Yes.
And all the buildings on them?
So give me an
Like the beach, like the beach house, all the, you know, if we put in bathrooms at any of these locations, like School Street or Marshall Park, fences.
I think the building itself would be under facilities, but the programming that happens at the beach would still fall under the DPW umbrella. But,
Good questions
Yes.
to kind of
yeah.
kick around a little bit, I think.
Because I think there is a suboptimal use of facilities, meaning parks and land and school basketball courts and tennis courts and everything else that just frustrates everyone in town. And then I think it seems logical if you're maintaining fields, one person could maintain all the fields better than two people combined. From scheduling and, you know, consistency and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And I think that's another really good aspect of this, Chris, that I'm glad you brought up. I mean, we went through this last summer, right, with the whole bathroom issue in the summer program. And what did we get? We got finger pointing between town and school roles, right? And now I understand there are a lot of circumstances around that, but you know, if you talk to, and I know I brought this up before, if you talk to the presidents of Lunenburg Bengals, Lunenburg Youth Soccer Association, Lunenburg Youth Basketball Association, all these organizations that use our facilities, mostly school, but some parks, and some town for practices at TC Passios. It's gotten better over the course of the last year because of sort of forced collaboration between some of these committees, but it's still a source of frustration. We still run into all kinds of scheduling problems. You'd be hard pressed, even now that we've redone a lot of these rates, to convince me that we're applying these rental charges based on real costs. And you try to go to somebody to try to figure out, you know, where do I go to appeal some of these issues or work them through, and you get the runaround between an athletic director and a facilities director and a DPW director and a park superintendent. And in my mind, like, there ought to be one throat to choke, so to speak, on a lot of these issues. And if we're gonna hire a new role, you know, maybe we ought to think about the roles and responsibilities and how this role can actually seriously benefit not only the maintenance of our buildings, but also the quality of life for, you know, these volunteers and people that run these really important organizations in town. Anyway, that's my piece on this.
Yeah, so I generally agree with the way you're thinking on that.
But I do think that, you know, come town meeting, we need a really thorough explanation of what we're doing here. And again, I totally support the head count. Like, I totally get that. I think it's very well warranted. I just think we need to be really thoughtful about the role. Stormwater. Monty Tech. So for the new members, I'm not sure that we covered this entirely, but what you'll learn when Monty Tech comes and presents is, if you think Chapter 70 was a difficult conversation, just wait for Monty Tech calculations, because it's mind-numbing. But what effectively happens is that the Monty Tech School Committee, which is a gigantic school committee with representatives from all of the member towns, somewhat proportionally put together, vote on a budget, and then it goes through the massive formula machine that the state has set up, and we get our assessment. If we decide that we don't want to pay that assessment, or we think it should be something less, we do in Lunenburg have the ability to appropriate a lesser amount. at town meeting. And if X number of towns also vote to appropriate a lesser amount, it causes a redo of their budget. It hasn't happened in my memory, but we do have some level of, I don't want to call it oversight because it really isn't. Some opportunity to push back on that if at some point we think it's too much. The other thing that is a source of frustration for me is that we have an allocation of seats at Monty Tech, but it's really not, there's no cap associated with it. So, if every student in Lunenburg theoretically wanted to go to a tech school, our budget would explode twofold. And there's absolutely nothing that we can do to help govern that. So it is what it is. It's kind of a burden of being part of that district. But I just wanted to mention that and kind of get those thoughts going so that as we get to that point, we can have that discussion.
Are the people from Lunenburg appointed by the selectmen, or are they appointed by?
I think it's an elected position.
No, it's appointment,
Is it? Appointed by who?
the select
The
board.
select board? It's Mrs. Reynolds
Yes,
still?
yep.
She used to be the chair of the finance committee many years ago. Okay, those are my questions for now. Are there any other questions?
So I do have a question. So this is with regards to inflation. So help me understand, so in the 2023 budget, it seems like most of the expenses, or many of the expenses, and also the revenues, I'm trying to understand if there could be an impact of inflation on any of those numbers or many of those numbers, but it does seem like a lot are locked in through contracts and bargaining agreements, et cetera, et cetera. Is there any exposure to the budget from inflation for 2023?
Good question. I'm trying to think of a scenario down to different departments. I mean, a lot of our budget-related expenses are contractual. So we have, service maintenance agreements or software maintenance agreements, that those figures were locked into those. And we talked about electricity and natural gas tonight, so that's maybe something because the market.
Raw materials, natural gas, asphalt, salt.
We go out to bid for, we have contracts for all those prices. So because we have to go out to bid for everything,
Right.
we do lock in a lot of those rates, prior to the fiscal year. So I can't think of a scenario where the inflation would be a factor. But
Maybe
if I think of one, I'll bring it up.
Yeah.
Maybe FY '24.
Yeah,
That's
stick
what I
ar-
was saying,
Stick
yeah.
around for a year.
I think going out, it's something we might want to think about because it could be significant in the out years here. And are the assessed values, how do they change with inflation? I guess it's just a market determined,
So
so they could. So that maybe they will grow with,
Yeah, but the tax
They're
base
expensive.
doesn't. So if you're talking about tax assessments?
yeah, so that's
So if
capped
the
at,
value of if the value of all of our properties goes up 100% in the next year, our taxes still go up 2.5%.
2.5%,
So it's
right.
it's a cap based on the total.
That's right.
And then apportioned to the total property value. So there's no, property value has.
That's right.
Property value has an effect on your individual tax bill.
Relative tax
But
bill.
not on our town's tax levy.
Right, so our 65% of our revenue is locked in at a max, kind of 2.5% plus new growth. But our expenditures are subject to inflation,
Yes.
so. Anyway, probably not a big topic for 2023 budget, but something I think I don't know, I'm not sure if it's come up in any of the statewide,
Came up in the MMA meetings.
Okay.
In one of the workshops that I monitored, and, one of the points that was made was when Proposition 2.5 was voted in 1980, we were in a massive inflation spike. And so it was actually put in place as a response to skyrocketing local taxes that were just set
Interesting.
at town meetings and by city councils every year, independent of anybody's ability to pay. So they put in this 2.5% tax cap as a mechanism of forcing cost controls, basically, on municipalities. The interesting thing is since 1983 or 84, we haven't seen inflation like we're seeing now.
Yep.
So it's actually a relatively new phenomenon for municipalities in Massachusetts to have to deal with. We've seen some massive spikes like 15, 20 years ago around health insurance, where those numbers were like going up by 30% a year, and, they were having huge budget implications. But, general inflation where everybody's costs go up, is something that we as adults have never really, experienced, unless you're of a certain age that none of us are.
Yeah.
Something that I would have a concern about is how much we can get done. We may have projections right now on a capital project, but inflation is definitely a factor. And when we go out to bid, that number may be way off, in 6 months.
Yep. And I would think too, just wage pressure is going to be coming
Yes.
very, very fast.
You do, just in conversations with E.L. Harvey today about what their labor shortage, it's obviously driving up wage rates for that industry. So they're paying drivers $28 an hour plus $5,000 signing bonus, and they still can't get
Wow.
people. So that's just gonna, yeah.
Okay.
And our cleaning company is another example of that. We had to, they couldn't provide the service of cleaning what we originally contracted with them, because they have a shortage of staff as well. And they're paying their cleaners $25 an hour, and they can't find help. So there's examples of that all over.
You think our problems are big now, just wait.
Yeah, no.
Mr. Passios, welcome.
Yes, hi, good evening. Sorry, just got out of the other meeting a few minutes ago. I do have one question about the budget that came to light after I sent you the message a day or so ago, Peter, if I may.
Please.
Yeah, in regards to health insurance for both the school and the town, forgive me if this has been talked about already this evening. I'm wondering if first of all, the percentage increase, it's not huge, but it is substantial. But is it based off of the actuals from last year, which were artificially low, or was that based off of what we budgeted last year and a percentage increase above that for this year? And then secondly, as part of that question, we created an insurance stabilization account last year with that savings. And is that going to be tapped to help offset that?
So the health insurance stabilization account is not included in the preliminary budget. So the recommendation at this time is to keep those funds in that account. And the percentage increase was based on last year's numbers.
Budgeted amount or actuals?
Budgeted.
But
Okay, that's fine.
the artificially low year was not FY '22, it was FY '21, right?
No, 22.
No, it was last year.
But we didn't get an unexpected tax holiday or holiday a rate holiday for FY '22. That rate holiday was
It
for
was this-
FY '21, wasn't
No,
it?
it's this year.
It was?
Yep.
So we budgeted above our spend for this year? for
No,
health?
we reduced,
That's what I'm getting to, is the budget should be in line with the spend for this year,
yeah.
right? Because we reduced the budget and moved that money to the stabilization account.
So the
I'll have
net
to go back
between
and historical
stabilization-
look at.
I'm sorry, Dave?
I was gonna say the net between the stabilization and what we actually expended for insurance, was pretty much equal to what we budgeted, which I think that's what Heather's trying to say.
Yeah, and that was my expectation for '22. '21, we had some excess funds available because it was,
We had a half a month
Yeah.
holiday
Okay.
premium.
all right.
Right, okay.
So
That was my
Dave, before you joined, we did have a discussion about the health insurance stabilization account, and the thinking that I think we all sort of agreed to, I verbalized, is without a pressing need to spend that money this year, it might be worth just holding that, anticipating a spike that could occur in an out year, in a year or two, and just being conservative with that money.
Total sense. I was just trying to get the comparison, as to that percentage increase, what the base number was, that percentage increase was based off, that's all. And I'm clear on it now. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? All right.
All right,
Thank you very much, Heather.
thank you.
Okay, I don't know what happened the first half an hour, but I jumped around a couple of things here, I noticed while you're presenting. Are there any new warrant articles that have been submitted at this point?
No, PAC submitted their annual article for their budget. That's,
And we'll be hearing from them.
What are we up to so far?
so they're the first article that we received, but we'll have our typical standard articles as we always do, so those we'll start there.
What was it up to, like the 35th?
Completely
36th?
irrelevant at this point.
Very relevant.
Use
it as a
They'll come
forecast.
fast and furious in a
Yes.
month. Okay.
Do we envision any that are gonna be difficult to have, budgets by the time of our, open meeting, whatever, our,
Public hearing?
public hearing?
What was the question?
What was the name, can you repeat the question, Chris?
Do we envision any warrant articles that are gonna be difficult to have dollar values by the time of public hearing this time?
When the select board makes a decision on the 30 School Street project, so that should be in time for the public hearing, so that figure would be known. We have a rough estimate for the Woodruff property, if that is a town meeting article and not a separate funding source. So those are the only two that I know of at this point, that
The 30 School Street project, I'm assuming we're talking about an engineering article, most likely?
I think they talked about wrapping that into the construction, so beyond, so the
So the-
schematic, it would
And
be
potentially
the,
phases of construction?
Right.
Okay. And it wasn't clear to me in the presentation the other night if engineering is incorporated in the costs of the phases that they outlined.
in the cost estimate, I identified all the soft cost on the outside of construction costs. So that
Roughly
design
3.5
costs.
is all in?
Yes, yeah. It was actually 4.2,
Oh, okay. A lot of money.
yes.
Would it be possible for us to get a copy of that presentation?
Yes.
I know we can
It's
watch
up-
it, but,
It's up on the website.
oh, okay, great.
Okay. Let's move on. Committee assignments. So I am requesting relief from my position as school committee liaison. I've been doing it for almost 3 years, and I think that not only does the position deserve some new blood, but I'm a little bit tapped out right now. And I'm looking to see if there are any other members who are interested, at least for the remainder of this fiscal year, for being the school committee liaison. And if we don't, then it'll just go unfilled and it'll be ad hoc.
I'd be interested for the remainder of at least the fiscal year,
Okay?
not for the remainder of my term.
These things have a tendency to be kind of
Oh,
sticky.
I know. I will happily bring it up January or July 1st.
Okay? Anybody interested in making a motion? If not, I will.
Nope, still yours. That's how it works.
Okay, make a motion to appoint Evan as our school committee liaison.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion from Chris Menard, a second from Jay Simeone. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, this will be a roll call vote. Chris Menard,
Aye.
Dave Passios,
Aye.
Tom Baelish,
Aye.
Tom Gray,
Aye.
Mr. Waters,
Aye.
Mr. Simeone.
Aye.
And I for myself. You are unanimously appointed. It was the easiest decision we've made in a long time.
Watch out, Carol.
Carol, you're not fully away from me. I'm still gonna haunt you. Okay, minutes. We have two sets of minutes in the shared drive. Minutes from January 13th and minutes from January 27th. I've just lost my Zoom connection. Is everybody else on? Okay. Everybody good?
Yep, I'm still on good.
Okay. Are there any comments on the minutes or motions to be made?
I have not read them.
Yeah, so who read them? I read them.
Okay.
I move that we adopt the minutes, both dates.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call vote. Mr. Passios,
Aye.
Mr. Menard,
Aye.
Mr. Baelish,
Aye.
Mr. Gray,
Aye.
Mr. Waters,
Abstain.
Mr. Simeone,
Aye.
and an aye for myself. Minutes are approved. Committee reports. Mr. Passios, we've missed you.
Yeah, believe it or not, I have a very short report. Green Communities met last night. Yeah, the days run together right now. Green Communities met last evening. We are moving forward towards a mid-April filing for the next round of grants. The committee presently is still concentrating or putting their efforts into bringing the streetlight proposals forward. We still don't have a brokered number from Unitil, but we have made some headway on that. But as I said at the last time I made a comment about this at one of our meetings, we do not have to have that completed before we apply for the grant. We are waiting for some projects to be submitted from, I believe, the school department and facilities departments, and we are sending them a letter saying that they need to have them to our committee by March 15th so that we can get them into the grant round process or review them and make sure that they fit the process and will be included if they do. Parks Commission, I'm not sure, they may not be done, or they may have just finished up a few minutes ago. Discussion about the town beach season. We're trying to stay on top of that so that everything goes smoothly and we hit the ground running late in the spring, early summer for that, and trying to make sure the kinks that we've had over the last couple of years do not repeat themselves with the registration for the beach and the swim lessons, so on and so forth. A little bit of discussion about Marshall Park, but that will be further discussed at our March meeting with our consultants, Walla They will be coming forward at that meeting with, I think I'll call it the final draft of the proposal for the master plan for the park. Trying to see my notes here. I think that's about it. Rob Thompson was with us for the entire meeting and is working diligently to bring some programming forward, and has been, he reports he's been successful in pinning down substantial timeframes where the Parks Commission will be able to offer programming in the TC Passios gym. I think that's about it. Thank you.
Okay, any other committee reports? I have two. The school committee has actually met twice since we last met. They met last night in a marathon meeting that I gave up after 4 hours and went to bed. And they were just moving into committee reports. So the most of that meeting was spent around mask mandates. And the school committee decided to basically follow the governor and DESI's recommendation, as well as part of the recommendation made by our town physician or a school physician. They decided to make masks optional beginning on the 28th of February, but to maintain social distancing and other mitigation measures. So for example, desks will still not be put together in classrooms. There'll still be hand washing stations. Masks are still required in school nurses' offices, health offices, and on school buses, but not required throughout the school day in classrooms or moving about the halls and that sort of thing. And they will revisit that discussion with specifically around the mitigation measures and perhaps relaxing some of those at their meeting, I believe on March 16th.
16th, yeah.
Which will be the day before we actually meet with the superintendent on the 17th. So they'll review their budget and approve it, and also revisit COVID mitigation. They have made some minor tweaks to their budget. Probably the most interesting thing was they had, the superintendent had recommended the elimination of a librarian in the primary school. That has been restored. And a couple of other minor adjustments. They didn't go into a lot of detail, I think mostly because of time last night. But we will obviously be hearing in great detail from the superintendent in about a month. The Municipal Building Committee met on the 7th of February. As I mentioned to you at our last meeting, I was unavailable that night. I was attending an event in Boston. But I did watch the meeting and have had conversations with both the former chair and the new chair, who is Mr. Jeffries, has been elected chair. And we think that the initial set of meetings that will take place over the course of the month of March at least will be focused actually on Taipei and Vertex reports, kind of dusting off a few of those and looking at what needs to be done to continue to make buildings like Town Hall and Ritter serviceable, so that we understand sort of the financial aspects and the practical aspects of what could be the uses of these buildings. And then that will ultimately go into a discussion around prioritization and feasibility of a number of needs and how those needs could be applied potentially to these buildings before we go off and determine what we want to build or renovate either on the TC Passios property or someplace else. And part of the thinking behind that is there seems to be a sentiment in town that we're not going to vote to go and build something big and expensive until we determine what we're going to do with these buildings. That seemed to be an underlying sentiment that everybody has kind of identified, and we think that that's a prudent path to building consensus around whatever we're going to do in the out years around a major construction project potentially. There will be an ask coming to the Finance Committee. I don't know when, but I've discussed it in some detail with Mr. Jeffries around guidance for budget and borrowing, and some of the themes that I talked about tonight around debt capacity and how we can think about that strategically. I'm particularly concerned because despite my opposition to going and borrowing a lot of money this past year, we now have, as we've seen tonight, debt capacity that is going unused. And that is likely to continue for the next year or two until we figure this all out. And while we're not using that debt capacity, once we go and do it and borrow a whole bunch of money, that potentially pushes out a Turkey Hill project. And so I think we need to begin to think of some of those issues holistically. Speaking of which, Turkey Hill, I mentioned earlier in the meeting, did come up at the school committee meeting last night. They have asked for a reassessment of the cost, the replacement and/or rehabilitation cost of that building, so that that number, that bogey number that we looked at in the fall, is more accurate than it probably is right now due to escalating costs. And that's what I have right now on that. Any other committee reports? Items for future meetings. So a couple of things have come up in the last day. Obviously, you see the upcoming meetings in the agenda. We've got a long list of things to talk about over the course of the next several weeks. One topic that I noticed from reading the town manager's narrative and looking at the budget is there is a spike in the Board of Health requested appropriation. And I would like to entertain the interest of the committee in inviting a representative from the Board of Health, just to kind of give us an overview of what they do and what that money's for. It's an appropriation that we've made every year while I've been on the Finance Committee. Interestingly, the entire time that I've been on the Finance Committee, we've had a member who's also been a member of the Board of Health. But I'm not really read into it, and I don't know that the rest of the committee is either. So I'd like to just kind of gauge your interest and see if you think that that's an appropriate thing to do, and perhaps to find a place to add them to the calendar. Anybody have any objection to that?
No.
Okay. So with respect to upcoming, and I'll work with the town manager and the Board of Health to try to figure out where we fit that in.
Yep.
With respect to upcoming meetings, two things that I want to bring to your attention. First of all, on the 10th of March, we have a potential conflict that I just want to bring to everybody's attention. So at 7:30 on the 10th of March is the APDC hearing for the demolition of the old primary school. And so I don't particularly have an interest in appearing there. But if other committee members do, I think that may be something we want to plan around. If we want to continue and have our meeting as scheduled on the 10th of March, which would be my preference, I think we're scheduled in a good enough way that the town manager can go to that hearing.
Jump over here.
Monty Tech will invariably take an hour, if not a little longer, and then we can move on to DBW, hopefully while the town manager is here. The DPW presentation is a little bit different this year in that will be the second to last day of our DPW director who's resigned. So I do think that there's some continuity things that it's in our best interest to have you here for that discussion as well. But I'm sensitive to the importance of dealing with that issue across the street as well. So any thoughts or comments on that? No? Okay. The other thing that I emailed you all about today is I'd like to propose that the meeting on the 24th of February be fully remote. I am unable to attend in person next week, as is Mr. Menard. And I think that it would be easier to run a meeting remotely where there isn't a physical presence. And I think my preference would be to do it that way for next week. And then I'm open to the possibility of adding it, because we're meeting every week for the foreseeable future. If there's interest in adding remote meetings, I'm amenable to that. My preference is to be in person, but I wanted to kind of throw that out there and just see what you all thought.
I will not be able to attend physically here on the 24th either, so.
Okay.
Same here, Peter, I'll be out of state, but I will be available for that day.
Okay, so we definitely are going remote then.
You'll have Jay sitting alone on the stage.
That might be fun.
Putting in chairs.
You don't have to wear a mask.
All right, so let's decide on that. We're definitely going remote on February 24th, and then we'll call audibles on future meetings. Is that good?
Are you going to notify the 3 departments that are coming then?
Happy to do so.
Okay,
Yep.
great.
Yep. I have an email from you to them tonight, and I will just add an addendum to that.
Okay.
Okay, anything else on future meetings?
No.
I'm all over the place tonight. Is there any public comment? I don't know why I can't follow an agenda tonight. All right, hearing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Waters, seconded by Mr. Gray. Roll call vote, Mr. Passios,
Aye.
Mr. Menard,
Aye.
Mr. Baelish,
Aye.
Mr. Gray.
Aye.
Mr. Waters.
Aye.
Mr. Simeoni.
Aye.
And an aye for myself. We are adjourned. Have a good night.